Salt is essential to life. Literally, your body can't function without it. But if you're confused about what's out there, you're probably not using enough. So today, I'm gonna break down all of the varieties of salt so you know how to live your saltiest life. We should talk about salt, because you're probably not using enough, and the kind you're using is probably garbage. So when it comes to salt, chemically speaking, salt is salt, is salt, is salt, is salt, is salt. Salt is sodium chloride, and nearly everything you buy is almost 100% pure. And it's just these last wriggling little free percentage points that account for other things like color and flavor. But when it comes down to it, sodium is sodium, and sodium is so yum! Most people, what they have at home is iodized table salt, and that's the same kind of thing you're gonna find at every restaurant across America. Why is it iodized? What's in there? Well, it turns out salt, up until 1924, never had iodine in it. We added iodine in 1924 because the government realized that people in America were getting goiter. And goiter is an enlargement of the thyroid due to a lack of iodine. Iodine is one of those strange elements that is essential to your bodily function, but your body can't synthesize it. You have to get it from other sources. So the government started putting iodine in our table salt because they figured, what do people put on everything? Salt. Well, it mostly solved the goiter problem, and a strange side effect, because iodine is so important to your brain function, is that actually the national IQ went up a few points. Like, we actually got smarter when we started putting iodine in salt, which is super cool. But please stop using iodized salt. You definitely need iodine in your diet, but you can get it from other sources. Eat more seaweed. Seaweed is so good. Or eat cranberries, or more yogurt, or beans. All of these things have naturally occurring iodine. So let's scrap the iodized salt and move toward things with more flavor. Because iodine, when you add it to salt, actually imparts a bitter flavor, and nobody needs that. The other thing that's in regular table salt is some anti-caking agent, because table salt is ground so fine, so minutely, the crystal is so small that it actually begins to clump. So they add some other agents in there so that it won't do that, and you don't need any of that. The salt you're gonna see every chef use, and the salt that you probably are not using enough of, is definitely kosher salt. Now, first of all, let's clear up the name. Basically, all salt is kosher. The name is not in reference to what it is, it's a reference to what it was used for. So originally, in order to make kosher meat, you had to draw out blood. And this is before kosher meat was largely available at grocery stores. So butchers, in order to kosher meat, would salt it to draw out the blood. So it was a process called koshering, right? And you used salt to kosher meat. Therefore you had kosher salt. Now, the difference in it is actually just the grain size. Remember how I said table salt is ground very small? Well, kosher salt isn't. They're very large flakes, and that makes it much easier to see, okay? And that's really great when you have to do a large application of it, and chefs like it because you can actually see when you're sprinkling and you get a better distribution. Sea salt is actually really hard, and so is table salt. It's so fine, you can't get it evenly over everything. But kosher salt, easy to grab, easy to use, easy to see, so you know where you've salted. It doesn't dissolve instantly. Kosher salt, use more. Just for a minute though, let's be real. Salt may be salt, but not all kinds of salt are interchangeable when it comes to cooking. Table salt is ground very small. The grains are tiny. Kosher salt, not ground so small. The flakes are quite large. That means that if you actually took 2 measuring cups and you filled one up with table salt and the other with kosher salt, you would literally have twice as much salt in the table salt cup as you would in the kosher salt cup. So what does this mean practically? If you're reading a recipe and it calls for kosher salt and all you have is table salt, you've got to do the mental math and cut that amount in half. Otherwise, you're going to use way too much salt in your recipe. Remember, recipe calls for kosher salt and you only have table salt, use half as much of the measurement of table salt as you would for kosher salt. Let's talk about the fancy salt category now, which definitely begins with sea salt. And the clue there is in the name. It tells you how the salt was harvested. All salt in the world is harvested only one of two ways. The first way is that you dig a hole in the ground, you mine it, you actually drill into rock and you find salt mines. That's where kosher salt's coming from, that's where table salt is coming from. But sea salt is different. They actually evaporate seawater. They make little shallow pools. They evaporate the seawater, and what you are left with is the naturally occurring salt from the ocean. It is literally sea salt. Now remember I was talking about those extra few percentage points in how much sodium chloride is in what you buy? Well, sea salt is a slightly different color usually because there's a few percentage points of other minerals, right? You're getting this salt from the ocean. There's lots of other minerals dissolved in that water, and when you evaporate the water slowly, what you're left with is salt that has some character to it. We like sea salts because they have other flavors. They have some other naturally occurring minerals that change the color, that change the texture, and that change the flavor. There are a lot of varieties of sea salt out there because there's a lot of ocean water, and you'll see names like Malden and Fleur de Sel and Celtic salt. Now, all of these are just in reference to where the seawater was evaporated. Celtic salt often happens to be quite wet still. You can see it's clumping up in my hand. It's a very wet salt, which means that they didn't evaporate nearly as much water. Now, why would you want that? It's beautiful to finish a dish. This sits on top of roasted vegetables or a chicken very beautifully as you bring it to the table. Fleur de sel, flowers of salt, same thing. They're actually little clumps of wet grains of salt from France. Malden salt happens to come from Malden, which is in England. Then you'll see some flavored salts. You'll see smoked salts and you'll see bacon salts and all these things. Now that's regular salt, or sometimes sea salt, or sometimes kosher salt with extra things added. That is not a natural process. Those are flavored salts, and those are great, but those have to be manufactured. The last thing on our list is that crazy thing that everyone's nuts about, Himalayan pink salt. And to be honest, for the life of me, I can't figure out why anyone cares about this so much. Himalayan salt comes from a mine. It's not sea salt, right? So this comes from digging a hole in the ground. Now, it actually comes from one of the largest salt mines in the world. It's not really a rare thing, okay? There's an enormous salt mine in the Himalayas. Now, the salt is naturally pink because there's some iron oxide present. It's a beautiful color, don't get me wrong. The grains are gorgeous. You normally find them very coarse, and it's perfect for finishing a dish. But the flavor is not outrageous. The texture, not really outrageous unless you get those large grains. Kosher salt and sea salt are really all you need, and you should have them available to you very easily. The more available it is, the more you're gonna use it. And I know you're scared of salt because some doctor told you that it's gonna give you high blood pressure. And listen, for some people, that's the real deal. But honestly, you're probably not using enough salt. That's why your cooking probably sucks. Don't be afraid of it. You'll know when it's too salty. Experiment. The only way to get better at cooking is to try new things. Figure out what you like best, why you like to use them, and then get cooking. I hope you found this video helpful. If you did, make sure to share it with your friends, and don't forget to comment below and tell me what you'd like to see in a future episode of Counterintelligence. And always, guys, subscribe!